And then I will briefly mention some experiments along the line of trustworthy experiments, and then some outlook what we currently think is interesting for us to do in the laboratories. Okay, so I'm a photon guy. I work with photons, and I think they're a very neat system because they can be applied for many different applications or research fields. Of course, they've been the early choice for foundations experiments to study entanglement. Their mobility makes them useful for metrology applications. That's a hype, in particular in the States. And of course, they're the natural choice for communication aspects because they just fly, no? at the speed of light. Okay? And then 10 years ago, it was shown, or more than 10 years, that photons can also be used for computational architectures where you effectively make gates via the measurement process. You know, photons don't interact, so the challenge is how can you make gates where one guy defines what the other should do. No? And this is shown here basically by measuring one of the photons, you effectively introduce a nonlinearity. The thing was surprising to me, even though I worked for many years in this computational business, was that you can combine those two fields, which is obviously interesting for networks and cloud networks and in this kind of verification schemes and so on. But this system seems to be in particular nice for the realization of some kind of real architectures. Chris is not here yet, but to give credit to other guys, so as shown by The Economist just June 20th, a few days ago, there's a head-to-head race. And actually, from my point of view, there is no best system yet. So every system has a problem, has bottlenecks. So when you go to talk to the guys after a beer, everybody confesses there's still a challenge that has to be solved. Sometimes engineering, sometimes more than that. But including our systems, photons, we have things to address. And I think a really like head-to-head race from superconductors, and even if big companies like Google or Microsoft jump in, it's still open. I think it makes it interesting because there's so many physics happening by developing different or solving different issues there that I think it's good that we have no best system yet because we learn so much from interesting physics. Okay. Good. Back to photons. How do we encode information? That's a very handy system because we use the polarization. Well, you can use many things. We typically take polarization degree of freedom. So a photon for me is a bullet where I can define the polarization. H and V is 0 and 1, and you can superimpose those very nicely by just using phase retarders and so on. Entanglement is normally generated by a nonlinear process from a crystal. One blue photon is converted into two reds. If they're different polarized and you take them from cross sections here, you get very highly entangled states up to 99.999% fidelity. If you're thinking in computational language, which you might guys do, then you rather take single photons, you interfere them at beam splitters, and there's basically, if two photons come in here and they come out there, they go through a CNOT gate, given that extra photons also interfered and you measure them over there. There you can see the price to pay for these gates is you need extra photons to make those gates happening. However, that's not always true. Sometimes you can make it simpler by basically taking photons from different sources, as shown here, and then you combine them here at those beam splitters. Of course, it's probabilistic. There's only 1/2 chance for each of those gates to succeed, but very often it's sufficient to make interesting entangled states and to use them for example, measurement-based schemes. So you generate and you destroy at the same time, but it's still good enough for the computation. For example, if you have 4 of those entangled states, you can fuse them to a GHZ state with 8 photons. What's the price to pay? The price to pay typically is that the counts go down. We have very low count rates or generation rates of those states. So that's a random emission of each of the crystals. To have them emitted simultaneously, of course, it scales exponentially. So typical numbers in the laboratories are 1 pair, no problem. 500,000 counts, and you can work nicely with high quality. 2 pairs, well, you have basically 500 counts per second, which makes it already a little tricky, but it's nice. No problem to work with 4-photon entanglement. 6-photon means like, well, you have basically every 2 seconds a click, and if you go for statistics, you measure basically hours or days. If you go for 8 photons, the current record with such kind of schemes, but there are ways to improve that. But currently, that's the state of the art. You have 1 click per hour, which means you measure for weeks to get good statistics of your 8-photon state. If you keep in mind you want to do tomography of that, well, you have issues then. However, you can improve the schemes, as shown previously here, by adding extra photons, which goes from exponential scaling to some kind of better scaling. So Chris came, so just for Chris show that I said, honestly, to our guys, we have this head-to-head race, and Chris does beautiful physics you will see afterwards, where he uses ions in particular and photons. So I see him half photon guy because he likes photons, that we have here this kind of situation here. Okay. So when a photon guy talks about gates, then we have, for example, something in mind with two CNOTs. As shown before, you would take one gate with extra photons, second gate where you say, OK, make it simple. We just destroy the photons after the gate. And that's how it would look like. More fancy, to show for experimentalist, you show all the ingredients, laser, down conversion crystals. There are two crystals basically fused together as one crystal here. And then you see the first gate and the second gate. And that's a real laboratory scheme where this is the first CNOT, that's the second CNOT. And you see, if you don't use integrated optics, it takes a big lab space to make just two CNOTs currently with photons. And of course, they have to interfere. So keep in mind, photons are very short for us. There's a few microns. So you have to align everything with high precision to achieve those gates. So I know that's a lot for computer scientists to see real lab stuff. So to make it more feasible, and I said, please enjoy the ride. There's a movie of this two CNOT scheme. So here what I just said with my broken English is now this movie. Laser comes, we generate pairs forward and backward from this down conversion crystal. Photon comes, strong blue light. Sometimes back we get our photon pairs here. We take the same laser and send it back. We get other photon pairs too. Keep in mind, two are the golden guys for the CNOT, two are the ancilla pairs. So we have many shots, 80 millions per second, so we get this kind of avalanche of pairs. Sometimes we have four at the same time. I mentioned this 500 hertz before. And then they have the journey. And if everything's aligned properly, they go through wave plates. You adjust here the polarization. You interfere them at beam splitters. If one guy is measured here, then you trigger the successful gate operation. You continue the journey over there. Then again, wave plates here. You adjust the polarization, the single qubit gate as you wish. You see how the polarization is changed. And it goes through the plates. Isn't it cute? Look. So you can really do whatever you like. And at the end, there's the last CNOT gate, for example, by interfering them here, and then you trigger, and the two CNOT computation was done. That's basically how the lab stuff looks like when people think in terms of comics, what's happening there. OK, and at the end, of course, you measure you do analysis by using, again, wave plates and so on. Thanks. I can go now, huh? Dismissed. OK. OK, let's back to some science. OK, that's enough of technology. From now on, I hope I can go more to your language, to what you have done with those little photons. And you will see experimentalists use different languages than you guys. So we try to avoid equations and more make an argument why it's interesting. So the first thing, or one of the things we have done is secure quantum computing using photons. Okay? And here we used in particular the mobility of photons to achieve this kind of delegated stuff. Joe is there, one of the theoreticians. It's nice to have now my backup for the interesting theory questions that might show up. So of course, security is a big issue. It's as old as I am, basically in 1978 when I was born. We was asked the questions, can we encrypt basically also like the processing of data in the computer? And as people, friends who work in the bank, they tell me actually they look seriously into the bank accounts to see basically who's the richest guy to marry. And it's something you would like to hide. So obviously, there's big interest there to hide Gmails, Facebooks, so this kind of stuff. Besides the classical solution, 2009, with computational security, it was shown that also quantum physics is out there to make basically unconditional security, which is a new feature for quantum computers in my eyes. And one of the first schemes was this blind quantum computing by Anne Broadbent, Joe Fitzsimmons sitting over there, and Elam Kashefi, who could not come to the conference, who've shown you can achieve universal blind quantum computing where you can have a client with almost only classical resources to delegate some kind here. Classical client delegates some quantum computing that the input, the processing, the output remains hidden, okay, to the quantum computer itself. So basically, when I heard the first time this kind of story, 2009, by Elham, he was at the conference, I immediately thought it's interesting. I've not understood the full story at that point. Honestly, I was familiar with cluster states. That's something I've done for my PhD. I've seen a talk about, cool, there's something secure. I understand the phase arguments a little bit. So we had a chat, and then there was briefly after that arrangement that we met at Edinburgh all together, and it was very interesting because I had to confess, look, experimentalists, we have 4 qubits. That's it. Okay, what? 4? Huh? And they're like, okay, what about 20? No, 4. But at the end of the day, it was like a nice compiling of breaking down the theory to something that could be done in a laboratory. And it was at the end a very fruitful collaboration where until now, particularly with Joe, we have very nice exchange. And I learned a lot, so I'm happy about that. And B, we have sometimes ideas what can be done in the laboratory. So if you guys have ideas out there that can be done in few qubit systems, experimentalists love that, okay? So please try to compile sometimes things down to what we can do in a laboratory, okay? And you learn from us because we come with real problems. Look, there's noise, there's issues, so I come to that later. It goes in both directions, at least from my point of view. Okay, after a few drinks, you see there was I forgot, there was some kind of Royal Society, whiskey bar, whatever. After a few drinks, 4 qubits were enough. That's fine, okay? We were happy with that. Good. Continue. Basically, how is this story going on? So the idea of blind quantum computing is based on this measurement-based quantum computing, where you have cluster states, you make measurements, and therefore you process the information, which is different to the regular gate or circuit model over there. I guess you're familiar with that, so keep it rather short. To remind you how cluster state computing works, you take qubits in a plus state, you entangle them to cluster states, that's shown by this bond. Now you make the measurements, basically given by this XY plane, so you measure always here between 0 and 1 superposition states. You just have the freedom to choose the phase, the measurement basis by this angle here. When you make a measurement on this guy, then you basically transfer this kind of state over there by some kind of rotation. The rotation here is given by what you've chosen as the measurement basis. So you rotate the plus guy by some rotation around the z-axis followed by the Hadamard over there. That's basically all what you do. That's the idea of cluster state computing for us experimentalists, okay, in a simple language. It was done already 10 years ago. But the nice thing is of this computation, it shows nicely that you can split the classical and the quantum part. Question to you guys, what's classical? The quantum stuff is the quantum correlation, obviously. The resource is pre-existing, it's there, okay? So now the classical stuff is basically how you drive your computer. That means, A, it's basically the measurement angles, which kind of measurement angle you choose to rotate. And of course the structure, because if it's one-dimensional, then you go just like that, which corresponds to a 1-qubit gate. If it's 2-dimensional, you have a 2-qubit gate array and so on, okay? So structure and angle define how you drive your computer car through the landscape. So if you hide those things, that's the idea of blind quantum computing, voila, the computer has no idea what's going to happen. That's precisely the concept of blind quantum computing. So hiding the structure is pretty simple. Just define a generic brick structure like that, out of 10 qubits, where just the measurement angles define what's going to happen. A Hadamard, identity, also all the ingredients that's needed for universal quantum computing. In other words, if you build a computer out of those brickworks, just looking by the brickwork structure, you have no idea what's going to happen, okay? They all basically could be different gates at the end. So there's no way to learn from the wiring what's going to happen. Okay, first thing done, in secret. So how do we hide the angles? Well, that's basically by changing slightly the gain. So now instead of having plus states, you have the freedom as a client to choose one of 8 different phases here, shown as this kind of color codes. One phase, another phase, and so on. You send the qubits, each of them with different phases, to the computer, who has the power. It's the hard thing to do, to entangle them to a cluster state where the computer doesn't know which kind of cluster state, because it has no access to the phases here by the no-cloning theorem, obviously. And then use the guy from the client to tell the computer, please measure according to what I tell you to do. And to understand how the computation works, you need 2 parameters. The measurement angle, the computer knows that's this degree of freedom. But you also need to know what kind of previous phase you put on each of the qubits. Here, another phase there, and so on. So both informations are necessary to know what kind of things we implement as a gate. Voila, computer only knows this parameter here, therefore it has no idea what kind of actual rotation he's implementing, and therefore it doesn't know what kind of gate he's doing. That's the story. So in a nutshell, it means like a client just prepares the random phase qubits to a computer who entangles them, computer makes the measurement, he sends information back, nothing makes sense to the computer, only use the client, basically know what's going to happen. So we have done such things with the photons. I mentioned 4 photons. That's a similar setup as shown before. Here 4 photons on the client side, We send them to the computer who entangles them via those beam splitters, and basically the whole story can be shown here with such a arrangement. With such a little framework, we could show arbitrary 1-qubit gates, arbitrary 2-qubit gates, and various algorithms that can be done with 4 photons. So, okay, nice gossip on the side. The thing that was very interesting to see from the referee reports we've done this story was they asked good questions, at least from my point of view. The questions were, what about noise? What about when you basically have realistic scenarios as you do, guys, because you don't have perfect fidelities? And we learned from these kind of questions and basically asking ourselves, what do we got? What have we here on our experiment? That it's more secure than what you have in, or at least what I had in mind at that time. So more secure means that when you have a messier computer, you still have the chance, there's still a situation that the client does not provide this information. So the computation might go wrong, but there's still no information leakage to the computer if there's some non-perfect entangling gates, non-perfect operations, and so on. As long as you randomly choose the phases there. Okay? So when I made the statement, I had to give a talk a month ago, I made the statement that we had good, very good referees asking good questions. Suddenly Charlie Bennett raised the hand. I want to emphasize there was an excellent referee who made this question. So it was like funny to see that sometimes people are happy about it. So, okay, we have to send some kind of thank you cards explaining it. Good. The thing that was also interesting to me that being new to this field, it was shown, we became aware that such a blind quantum computer opens the doors to fundamental questions or even like verification questions, that you can use such a toolbox to really verify the quantum beast. So I'd like to take a slide from Adam which says, well, if you have a classical resource like this, how can you verify that a quantum computer more powerful than you are? That's a picture from the 16th chapel in Rome that is doing the job properly. How do you know that 42 is the right answer, for example? Okay, so in your language, if you be in this BPP, how can you verify BQP? And you're much better than I am in that field, so I will not mention any details here. Just to me, in a nutshell, it's like there's a verifier who wants to verify the prover is doing the job properly, correct computation. The question is, what's the minimal exchange, the minimal resource you need to verify the thing? And currently it seems that this blind quantum computation is a very interesting candidate for having low resources that you need as a client, almost classical resources to verify a quantum computer. In a nutshell, with 4 qubits in this blind quantum computing, we use so-called trap qubits, where one guy is a trapper, we know the eigenstate. Basically, when the computation is done, we can verify that this qubit gives the right answer. We place it randomly here at the corner or somewhere at the end. We verify that this guy basically is in the right eigenstate, and you can put it in the framework of the big computation to really verify the entire machine. I think I'll stop here because you are more expert than I am. I'd rather use the last minutes to show what else we have done and currently doing. We like secure quantum computing, so there are other schemes out there that might have some security aspect in there. One is to have this measurement-only quantum computing, which is like, computer makes a cluster state, and I just send the qubits to the client, and it just do measurements. So you can ask, is this really a delegation? I'm not so sure, but at least it shows sometimes you can rephrase schemes to also achieve some kind of security. So basically you have a cluster state now. There's no encoding, no phase addition, just like regular cluster computation. And now you send this basically to an Alice, where she makes measurements. Basically, by having only her making the measurements, you still have some kind of security, because by the no-cloning principle, you can achieve that the computer cannot learn what kind of stuff Alice is doing. So we used our computer now that this is just one big computer here. We sent qubits to Alice, prepared different cluster states, and she basically measured and could implement various interesting gates in a secure level. Also verification is possible, but that's basically just something I would like to mention briefly. Good. The other things that Joe mentioned also is okay, now I changed gear. That was secure quantum computing using cluster states. Photons are very nice because they're easy to interfere, and they're bosons. Okay? As Joe mentioned, there's now a hype these days, a revival of photonic quantum computing by boson sampling. Because boson sampling means photons are bosons, interferometric networks are more or less easy to do, so we have basically a good chance with low resources to do interesting quantum computation. So what people have in mind is for interference patterns, as Joe has shown, you build networks like that. Beam splitters and phase shifters allow you to map any input photon coming from here to any output state, okay, in an efficient way. So that's a picture of a real interferometric structure. You have modes here, beam splitters, and the phases are hardwired. But that's basically how we can do it in the laboratory, by things which are as big as my fingernail, really in a small scale, okay, because you etch the paths with lasers in such networks. When you have more than one photon coming in, let's take the simplest case, like a beam splitter. And beam splitter is given by a matrix here. It's a 50-50 beam splitter. And if 2 photons coming in, then you observe a very well-known effect that photons tend to bunch. It's called Honger-Mandel effect, or photon bunching effect, that if 2 photons come, one here, one there, and they interfere in a quantum mechanical way, then you will see that the amplitudes of both being transmitted and both being reflected cancel. So only 2 photons in one mode, or 2 photons in the other mode come out. And what happens is, basically calculate the permanence of such a matrix if you look at different output ports. Transmission plus reflection is 0. What you do is these terms here, basically permanent, which is obviously very hard to calculate, therefore interesting to study by experiments. Yes? Okay. So that's a picture again of the chip. There's a real photo of the fluorescence in such a chip, so we send strong laser light to see the path, so that's scattering basically what you don't want. Scattering means loss. Loss is bad, but for picture issues, it's nice to do that. There's the output, and it was so interesting that 3 other groups as well, Oxford, Brisbane, and Rome, jumped on that field because here's the kill application. The kill application means in an ideal case, 20 photons in a network of 400 nodes get so complicated that no classical computer can calculate the output, okay? So you might answer, okay, there's 2 things. One is like, wow, that's cool. You don't need 2-qubit gates. You don't need all those complicated stuff that the Shor algorithm and all the other things would need. Just like 20 photons, 400 nodes, which I think is really feasible in the ideal scenario. Okay, obviously if you have noises and other issues, it might be 100 photons, but still it's not a million photons as for many other schemes. So you're asking, why is this the heck interesting? Because you just sample some unitary there. The answer is this one. Does somebody know what this picture is, what this kind of car is?
Fast?
Yeah, what's the name of this one? Why fast? What's the purpose of this car?
I think that.
Fast? What fast means? What are barriers? You know, when you play cards with teenage age?
Speed of sound?
Precisely. That's the supersonic sound. Supersonic car, SSC, was the first car to break the sound barrier on ground. Okay? It couldn't do anything, just go straight and fast. Couldn't turn left and right, and couldn't open the roof, but it was just fast. And the same is the issue for quantum computers. We would like to surpass the classical limit. So there's still a question, is the fundamental problem to go beyond classic computers? Like people like to talk about quantum Church-Turing thesis and other arguments, but at least it would be nice to show experimentally, yes, you can outperform those things, and that's one way to do it, at least in a controlled fashion. You know, the unitary, you sample that, and here you can really make a benchmark to say, yes, we go beyond classical regimes. So for me, boson sampling is just this car. It's fast. It cannot do anything else, okay? That's my understanding of boson sampling at the end of the day. Okay, being a fan of security, I'd say, well, we can also put security in boson sampling, and Joe mentioned this, so I keep it short. If you allow polarization degree of freedom by playing with polarizers here, and then the integrated circuit there, then basically you have different inputs which can be orthogonal states, and if you play around with the phases, you can encode which of these guys basically do the interesting computation for you. Basically, as Joe just mentioned, so I want to keep it fresh. Good. That was the last slide about security issues. So the last minutes I would like to show for things that I think are interesting. One is to show new concepts of computation, okay? The photons are very neat because they're handy to arrange, and you know they fly around, you can superimpose whatever you like. So one thing we've done recently is to superimpose gates, okay? So as we all learn in school, or in this 101 lectures of quantum computing, you superimpose always the serial bonds. No, you have this Hadamard, and the serial becomes superposition input, and then you have your computation much faster happening. But what happens if you play around with the gauge? You can superimpose those as well. So this idea comes actually from more like superposition of causal order structures. But more as a computer scientist, you can also phrase this in terms of computer gates. The idea is very simple. So the question is, can you use quantum physics to superimpose first this gate 1 and 2, and then the other way around, which means like superposition, like this kind of Escher pictures, where you don't know where it goes first. It's a photon system. It's very simple to build it. For example, take a polarizing beam splitter, where H polarized is transmitted, V polarized is reflected. If it's H, it goes first U1, comes here, transmitted, goes over there, up here, transmitted again, then a second gate, and leaves. If it's V, it comes in, reflected, not this guy first, reflected over here, here, reflected, and then this one. So H goes one order, V the other order. If you not take H plus V, superposition state, then you basically have those superimposed, and you can also map it in terms of computer languages as a two-switch gate which superimposes those things. If you ask, why is this interesting, then there's several answers. The first is, obviously it shows a speed up compared to classical computers. That's not surprising, it's because that's something quantum computers do all the time. But it's also faster than regular quantum architectures for quantum computers, okay? So you see, linear advantage, or sometimes even it's quadratic advantages to quantum algorithms, which is nice, because it says there's still potential for doing something more than that we learn basically 5 minutes. in our regular schemes. And the thing we're also interested is to superimpose, and we work on that right now, to superimpose causal order. We have an experiment where causal order situations are superimposed, which I think is somewhat strange to think about it from what we humans as we experience in our everyday life. So more mathematically, if H photon comes, we have this kind of gate order. If P photon comes, the opposite gate order. Superimpose, you have both coexisting. And now you can see we have one measurement, for example, if they commute or anti-commute. If they anti-commute, you get a phase shift of minus, okay? And then you would see immediately that it goes a different output port if it be the smart interferometer. So that's a picture of the setup. Photons come here. Beam splitter says either go this path, first gate, and then the other gates, or go this path, first this gate, and then the other gates, and leave. They come out at this port. If they commute, if they don't commute, they come out at that port. Okay, basic knowledge question to you guys, experimentalists. Basically give the answer, and you say if it's right as a theoretician. If the gates are like, if the operations are defined as identity, they commute obviously the one output port green. If it's X and identity, of course they commute green. If you take X and Z, do not commute, it's the other port. So at least you confirm what the people learn with Pauli matrices, commuting, not commuting. To give a full picture, we took many different settings of very weird unitaries to give a full picture about all possible schemes and commutation, anti-commutation. And that's important to do because there are quantum algorithms for this simple case that give a very good answer to do they commute and not commute. So we had to be at a very high level of above 90-something degrees fidelity to really outperform the best possible quantum scheme for this little case. But we did it. That was a nice thing to show that quantum computation is much richer, even for security aspects as we have in mind. Okay, I think I should stop here since Stephanie is talking about gravity. I had in mind to mention also our big effort to study in the laboratory gravitational effects, and I just use 1 minute. It was shown that you can study laboratory effects where you need both theories, quantum physics and general relativity, to explain what you're going to see. In a nutshell, if there's no moon and you have a Mach 10 where one photon comes in, you would see that all the photons come out as one port. It was perfect interference. Okay? Photon interferes with itself, would come out all the time here if it's a quantum interference situation. If you put the Earth here, for example, then you see here a time dilation because the gravity bends space-time. So you would see that this photon basically becomes distinguishable from that one. You see that suddenly clicks show up here. If it's a very big delay, it would show that interference breaks down. You always have 50-50 contribution. So that's basically how pictures show it. The beginning is a small phase shift. If it's very big, this effect, it breaks down. What's the problem? It's a small effect. So it's a big interferometer. Big means it is basically 1 square kilometer, you have a phase shift of 10 to the -4. If it's 1,000 square kilometers, then you start to really see that photons don't overlap anymore. And you really have a unique signature of this kind of interference effect. However, we aim to do such a thing in a laboratory, but we started first with faking gravity by rotating one arm around the other to see if this is feasible. That's basically what we aim to do with this kind of rotating Mach 10. That's one arm, here's the other, we rotate. We will hopefully see phase shifts of 10 to the -3. In some later stage, you would like to flit an interferometer to. So my dream experiment is, now stop, last minute, need a paper. Need a paper. So my dream experiment is to see quantum physics and gravity together. Perfect Mach 10 like this. One photon comes in here, 100% comes out there. Very precise experiment. You start to tilt, and you see that this path feels a different space, curved space-time than this path, and you suddenly see a change of the output ports, which uniquely can be addressed with this kind of effect. Of course, very hard because it must be big interferometers or long fiber coils and very precise. But that's my dream, that before I die or retire, give such an experiment here flat, and then we tilt and we see a signature that both concepts, complementary principle, quantum physics, and gravity must be basically put together to explain the effect. Okay. That's in a nutshell what I really like to talk about also. And okay, let's finish. We work everywhere with photon sources, new detectors to improve efficiency. We have chips, and we work there a lot. And I rather spend the time to give credit to the people who make this experience possible. So it's basically the bunch of excited students who work on technology or implementation of setups or the gravity project. And here's the summary. I think I'll stop here because I think I took more time than I should take. And thank you very much.
Again, the chance again for quick questions. So we move on. Please.
So how big is your interferometer for your last experiment?
1 meter is 1 arm and then 100 kilometers of coils. So we have 0.1 square kilometers. This is 1 meter height. You can easily tilt. Principle. Super high precision. We take semiconductor industry knowledge for making no vibration and so on. And 100 kilometers of fibers right now. And all those fibers, and that's what you just can achieve these days. But of course, temperature is an issue. Everything is an issue because you have the tiniest phase shifts coming from everywhere. Temperature, noise, and so on. So we have to learn about those things, and we are just beginners.
Okay, great. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.